When the judge fined Pam Bondi in court, everyone expected her to stay quiet. But Bondi, known for her sharp mind and fearless attitude, had a different plan. She stood up, looked the judge straight in the eye, and dropped a bombshell that left the entire courtroom in shock. With calm confidence, she revealed a legal twist that turned the case upside down. The judge was speechless, the audience gasped, and chaos erupted. By the time Bondi finished, one thing was clear: she wasn't just fighting a fine, she was proving why she's one of the most formidable legal minds around. The courtroom was packed that morning, the air thick with tension. Pam Bondi, the former Attorney General and one of the most respected legal minds in the state, sat at the defendant's table, her expression calm but unreadable. She was known for her sharp intellect, unwavering confidence, and a reputation for never backing down from a fight. Today, however, she wasn't there to argue a high-profile case or defend a client. She was there because of a fine that had been slapped on her for contempt of court. The charge stemmed from a heated exchange during a previous hearing. Bondi had been representing a small business owner in a dispute with a powerful corporation. The judge, a stern and no-nonsense figure, had grown impatient with Bondi's relentless questioning and accused her of disrupting the proceedings. When Bondi refused to yield, the judge had her fined on the spot. The legal community was abuzz with the news. Pam Bondi fined? It was unheard of. Some saw it as a blow to her reputation, while others viewed it as an overreach by a judge who didn't like being challenged. Bondi, however, remained unfazed. She had no intention of paying the fine, not without a fight. As the hearing began, the judge took his seat, his expression stern. He glanced at Bondi, clearly expecting her to apologize or at least show some remorse. But Bondi sat perfectly still, her hands folded neatly on the table, her gaze steady. She wasn't there to beg for forgiveness. She was there to make a point. The prosecutor, a young lawyer with a nervous demeanor, stood to present the case. "Your Honor," he began, "Ms. Bondi's behavior during the previous hearing was unacceptable. She repeatedly interrupted the proceedings, ignored your instructions, and showed a blatant disregard for the court's authority. The fine was not only justified but necessary to maintain order." The judge nodded, his expression grim. "Ms. Bondi," he said, turning to her, "do you have anything to say in your defense?" Bondi rose slowly, her presence commanding the room. "I do, Your Honor," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But before I begin, I'd like to request a moment to address the court." The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her request. "Very well," he said after a moment. "Proceed." Bondi stepped out from behind the table, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She paused, taking a moment to survey the room. Every eye was on her, every breath held. "Your Honor," she began, "I stand before you today not just as a lawyer, but as someone who believes deeply in the integrity of our legal system. I have spent my career fighting for justice, for fairness, and for the rule of law. And while I respect this court and the authority it represents, I cannot, and will not, stand by when that authority is misused." The judge's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Bondi continued, her voice growing stronger. "The fine you imposed on me was not about maintaining order. It was about silencing dissent. It was about punishing me for daring to challenge a ruling that I believed, and still believe, was unjust. And while I may have been the one fined, the real victim here is the truth." The courtroom was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Even the prosecutor looked uneasy. Bondi reached into her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit these as evidence. They contain transcripts from the previous hearing, as well as case law that clearly supports my position. What you'll find is that my actions were not only justified but necessary to ensure a fair trial for my client." The judge hesitated, clearly caught off guard. "Ms. Bondi, this is highly irregular," he said. "Perhaps," Bondi replied. "But so is finding a lawyer for doing her job." The room erupted into murmurs, the tension palpable. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order, but the damage was done. Bondi had thrown down the gauntlet, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. What happened next would leave them all speechless. The judge stared at Pam Bondi, his expression a mix of irritation and disbelief. The courtroom, already tense, seemed to hold its breath as the two locked eyes. Bondi's calm demeanor only seemed to fuel the judge's frustration. "Ms. Bondi," the judge said, his voice tight, "you are out of line. This is not the time or place for grandstanding. You were fined for contempt, and unless you have a compelling reason to overturn that decision, I suggest you sit down." Bondi didn't flinch. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I do have a compelling reason. And I believe it's in the best interest of this court, and the integrity of our legal system, that you hear me out." The judge leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming against the armrest. "Very well," he said after a long pause. "But make it quick." Bondi nodded and turned to face the courtroom. She held up the stack of documents she had pulled from her briefcase. "These documents," she began, "contain not only transcripts from the previous hearing but also case law that directly contradicts the basis for my fine. What they reveal is a pattern of judicial overreach that cannot be ignored." The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. The judge banged his gavel. "Order! Ms. Bondi, I warn you, this is not a platform for you to air your grievances. If you have a legal argument, make it. Otherwise, sit down." Bondi turned back to the judge, her expression unwavering. "Your Honor, my argument is simple. The fine you imposed was not only unjust but unconstitutional. It violates my right to advocate for my client and undermines the very principles this court is meant to uphold." The judge's face reddened. "Ms. Bondi, you are treading on very thin ice. I will not tolerate this kind of disrespect in my courtroom." "Respectfully, Your Honor," Bondi shot back. "This isn't about disrespect. It's about accountability. And if this court cannot hold itself accountable, then who will?" The room erupted into chaos. Reporters scrambled to capture the exchange, spectators whispered furiously to one another, and even the bailiff looked unsure of what to do. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, but the noise only grew louder. "Enough!" the judge shouted, his voice cutting through the din. "Ms. Bondi, you are in contempt of court, again. Bailiff, escort her out." The bailiff stepped forward, but Bondi held up a hand. "Your Honor, before you do that, I'd like to remind you of something." The judge hesitated, clearly caught off guard by her calmness. "And what might that be?" Bondi reached into her briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "This," she said, holding it up, "is a motion to recuse yourself from this case. It outlines a clear conflict of interest that calls into question your ability to preside over this matter impartially." The judge's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" Bondi stepped closer to the bench, her voice steady but firm. "Your Honor, it has come to my attention that you have a personal connection to the corporation I was representing against in the previous hearing. A connection that you failed to disclose." The courtroom gasped. The judge's face turned pale. "That's absurd," he said, though his voice lacked its usual authority. "Is it?" Bondi replied. She handed the document to the bailiff, who reluctantly passed it to the judge. "As you'll see, the evidence is quite clear. Your brother-in-law is a senior executive at the very corporation I was challenging. And yet you saw fit to preside over the case, and to fine me when I dared to question your impartiality." The judge scanned the document, his hands trembling slightly. For the first time, he looked unsure of himself. This is irrelevant," he stammered. "I had no knowledge of this." "Ignorance is not an excuse, Your Honor," Bondi said. "The fact remains that your actions have compromised the integrity of this court. And unless you recuse yourself, I will have no choice but to take this matter to the Judicial Review Board." The room was silent, the weight of Bondi's words hanging in the air. The judge stared at her, his expression a mix of anger and fear. For a moment, it seemed like he might argue further. But then, slowly, he set the document down and leaned back in his chair. "Very well," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I will recuse myself from this case. But let me be clear, Ms. Bondi, this is not over." Bondi nodded. "I wouldn't expect it to be, Your Honor." But I will say this, the truth has a way of coming out. And when it does, I'll be ready. With that, she turned and walked back to her seat, the courtroom still in stunned silence. The judge banged his gavel one final time. "Court is adjourned," he said before standing and quickly exiting the room. As the spectators began to file out, the buzz of conversation grew louder. Reporters rushed to get comments, while lawyers and onlookers exchanged shocked glances. Bondi, however, remained calm. She gathered her documents, placed them neatly in her briefcase, and prepared to leave. But before she could, a young lawyer approached her. "Ms. Bondi," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "That was incredible. I've never seen anything like it." Bondi smiled faintly. "Thank you," she said. "But this isn't about me. It's about making sure the system works for everyone, not just those with power and influence." The lawyer nodded, clearly inspired. "What happens now?" Bondi glanced toward the door where the judge had exited. "No," she said. "We wait. But one thing's for sure, this isn't the end. It's just the beginning." The fallout from the courtroom confrontation was immediate and far-reaching. Within hours, news of Pam Bondi's bold stand and the judge's recusal had spread like wildfire. Headlines blared. "Pam Bondi exposes judicial bias in stunning courtroom showdown," and "Judge steps down after Bondi's bombshell revelation." Social media exploded with reactions, with many praising Bondi for her courage and others calling for a full investigation into the judge's conduct. For Bondi, the attention was both a blessing and a burden. She had achieved what she set out to do, hold the judge accountable and protect the integrity of the legal system. But she knew the fight was far from over. The Judicial Review Board quickly launched an investigation into the judge's actions, and Bondi was called to testify. The hearing was tense. Bondi sat before a panel of senior judges, her demeanor calm but resolute. She presented the evidence she had gathered, including the documents that exposed the judge's conflict of interest. Her testimony was clear, concise, and unflinching. "This isn't about one judge or one case," she said, addressing the panel. "This is about ensuring that our legal system remains fair and impartial. When those in positions of power abuse their authority, it undermines the trust of the people we serve. And that is something I cannot, and will not, stand for." The panel listened intently, their expressions grave. By the end of the hearing, it was clear that Bondi had made an impact. The judge was formally reprimanded and removed from the bench, a decision that sent shockwaves through the legal community. But Bondi's victory didn't end there. The case she had been fighting, the one that had led to her fine, was reopened. With a new judge presiding, Bondi was able to present her arguments without interference. The small business owner she represented was granted a fair hearing, and the corporation was held accountable for its actions. For Bondi, it was a vindication of everything she had fought for. But it was also a reminder of the work that still needed to be done. In the weeks that followed, Bondi became a symbol of integrity and courage in the legal world. She was invited to speak at conferences, write op-eds, and even consult on judicial reform initiatives. But she remained grounded, always emphasizing that her actions were not about personal glory but about justice. One evening, as she sat in her office reviewing case files, there was a knock on the door. It was Marcus, the young lawyer who had approached her after the courtroom confrontation. "Ms. Bondi," he said, stepping inside, "I just wanted to say thank you. What you did, it inspired me. It reminded me why I wanted to be a lawyer in the first place." Bondi smiled. "Thank you, Marcus. That means a lot. But remember, this isn't about me. It's about the people we serve. As long as we keep fighting for them, we're doing our job." Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately. And I've decided to start a nonprofit, something that helps small businesses and individuals who can't afford legal representation. I was hoping, maybe you'd be willing to advise me?" Bondi's smile widened. "I'd be honored. Let's make it happen." As Marcus left, Bondi felt a sense of hope. The fight for justice was far from over, but she knew she wasn't alone. There were others, people like Marcus, who were willing to stand up and make a difference. The story of Pam Bondi and the judge didn't just end in a courtroom. It sparked a movement, a call for accountability, transparency, and fairness in the legal system. And while there were still challenges ahead, Bondi knew one thing for certain: as long as there were people willing to fight for what was right, there was always hope. The story of Pam Bondi and the judge is more than just a courtroom drama. It's a powerful reminder of the importance of integrity, courage, and accountability. Bondi's refusal to back down in the face of injustice didn't just change the outcome of a single case. It sparked a much-needed conversation about the flaws in our legal system and the need for reform. For Bondi, the experience was a testament to the power of standing up for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about ensuring that the truth was heard and that those in power were held accountable. Her actions inspired countless others, lawyers, activists, and everyday citizens, to demand better from their leaders and fight for a fairer, more just society. But the story doesn't end with Bondi. It's a call to action for all of us. It challenges us to question authority, to speak out against injustice, and to never lose sight of the values that define us. Because, as Bondi showed, real change doesn't come from silence. It comes from the courage to stand up and make a difference. In the end, the courtroom confrontation wasn't just a victory for Bondi or her client. It was a victory for everyone who believes in the power of truth and the importance of holding those in power accountable. And it's a reminder that, no matter how daunting the fight may seem, one person's courage can change everything. As Bondi often says, justice isn't just a word, it's a responsibility. And on that day, in that courtroom, she proved just how powerful that responsibility can be.